a surprise guest. I'm very happy to see you, Sandra, and thank you, Monica, for arranging that. This is a total last-minute guest that literally happened during the webinar. So this is nice to see you, Sandra. And thank you for arranging that, Monica. So Monica, I think, Monica, you don't need much introduction. I think a lot of our group knows Sandra, who works in fraud at Microsoft, and Monica's the founder of Chargebacks911. So I guess I'll let you start, Monica, and you can bring in Sandra as you wish. But we've just been through a tsunami of chargebacks. And is this over from your perspective, or is there more to come?
It is not over. So as the saying goes, never say never, I guess. So what we've seen, and just to kind of give an overview for those of you that don't, I know that chargebacks is in our name, so you would imagine, yes, we do something with chargebacks. So we actually are a technology platform provider for just about every type of dispute inquiry resolution, chargebacks being one of them. And we provide that platform technology to some of the world's largest financial institutions, as well as merchants worldwide. And in terms of chargebacks, we all know there was, you know, a real structural change with everything that COVID brought on. And that was a catalyst for lots of pain, widespread. The interesting thing, I think all of us kind of thought, okay, we have this new curve, this new trajectory. There is consumer behavior that has been shifted and forever. Nobody's going to forget how to file a chargeback, and it's become much more easy, or, you know, with less friction. But what we've also seen is with, you know, people have been staying at home for such a long time that it's creating, like, now we have almost the opposite problem, where it was almost, you know, no transaction volume in the travel industry, not really, finally the chargebacks dissipated just by default. There was nothing else to handle. And we're starting to see just a surge of, you know, it's not gradual, it's definitely not gradual. So I think, you know, a wise merchant would be one that, you know, doesn't take this as, you know, just a chance or some little blip. This is a new curve. And I'm happy that Sandra has joined us, because I can't think of somebody that is more, honestly, I found out she's so well versed in the travel industry. Probably most airlines even know her on a first name basis, but she's also coming with incredible fraud technology. So when you take a look at chargebacks, it's really like a full strategy. You need the front end for, you know, the fraud prevention, and then you also need that post-transaction fraud. And you really need both in order to have a data-driven, you know, solution. And I think this is really now becoming, you can no longer ignore this problem. You have to update your technology and use, you know, all the different tools that are available in the industry.
So Sandra, how does your technology play in chargebacks? Monica has invited you here, so obviously you have some surprise guests, but you must be working in this space. Can you tell us more about how does Microsoft play in this space?
Absolutely. So as Monica said, when you have that AI and the customer insights in the front of the payment mechanism, it's important to have that 360-degree view. So like with Microsoft and Chargebacks911, you get that combination of signals that it's feeding into that AI technology. So I don't want to say it's like predictive analytics, it's not, but it's important to have that feedback loop so you know what has transpired to become a chargeback, what has been a good transaction. You know, we always say it's just as important to know those good customers as it is to identify those bad. So with chargeback signals, you're able to do that effectively in front of the whole payment transaction. So working with like a Chargebacks911 is really imperative for the travel industry to have those signals ahead of time, in addition to your payments being fit forth.
So since you both work with other industries, what's good? Is travel the only industry hit during COVID, or is anyone else suffering like we are? Monica?
I would say just about every industry has suffered from chargebacks. In fact, I think now it could be kind of like you know, an initiation fee or initiation if you earned your stripes, saying that you ended up surviving COVID if you suffered chargebacks. Because this probably means that regardless of what industry you've in, you've had to pivot, you've had to change the way that you are doing business. And with, you know, any type of problem, there's opportunities to figure out ways to do things better, and also, you know, some consequence through trial and error measures.
Sandra, did you have anything to add? Like, what about other industries that you've seen hit hard in COVID for chargebacks?
Sure. So everything has been hit hard, from gaming to retail to improper returns. You know, retailers aren't accepting back clothing items. So when somebody's ordering clothing, then they don't want to receive it back because they don't know if somebody's had COVID. You know, this was back when you didn't know how it was passed on. So does that become a chargeback? That's more friendly fraud, right? So the retailer will then send out another size, another color, and they're not really verifying what's going on out there. And a lot of times we see what we call empathy fraud. And with that empathy fraud is another type of friendly fraud that's going on out there. Whether we had an Xbox example where we thought that there was a young person calling in and saying, oh, my mom lost her job to COVID. Can you extend my membership for a year? And the customer service reps were feeling so bad. Oh my gosh, I feel so bad. So they would do it. And then later, the next day, that same person would call again, and they would call again, and they would call again. So it's important to have those tools to identify those habitual refunders or those empathy fraud players. So it's not necessarily just a normal chargeback, but as Monica said, you have to have the tools to adapt to the changing environment out there. So it's a wide variety. You have retail, gaming, even state governments. You know, you hear a lot about the COVID funding and the FBI is returning billions of dollars to states. Well, that's something that Microsoft actually has a hand in to stop that before it actually happens. So it's a wide swath of issues that are across all verticals. So it's important to have tools that look across all verticals, not just within one vertical itself.
I think on that point, I'll comment on this, Chris. So I know we were having a conversation before, but you know, if we look at quick service restaurants, typically you would have no correlation between, you know, these tiny transactions to get a McDonald's hamburger, right, versus the travel industry, where, you know, it's a much heavier investment. But we've seen just a surge in chargebacks, and I think I love the term that you came up with, the newbies, because this is really, you know, a totally new demographic, just as Sandra was saying, that we have, you know, teenagers, all sorts of new demographics that have not really had exposure to this. They don't appreciate the consequences. They don't have the same level of responsibility. Their parents are trusting them probably more than ever, saying, I'm busy with work. Here is my iPhone, and it has my credit card in it, and just like, do whatever you want, just stay out of my hair. And to get out of this, then we're seeing lots of very creative avenues for fraud and chargebacks, and these are being exploited. So merchants really have to be on their toes. I think it all comes down to really knowing your customer. And with an organization like this, is why I love the fact that Sandra was able to join us, because what organization in the world is positioned to have access to more consortium data, to be able to identify those behavioral trends? Like, this is really important. It's not just about identifying the criminals. It's about really understanding the intelligent decision to make, whether it's a case of friendly fraud, and then look at rehabilitating that customer. You don't have to lose the customer because they committed friendly fraud. Sometimes it is truly accidental, and just like the example that we gave, you know, the authorized card user, it could be a child, it could be a teenager. Well, that doesn't mean that the actual card holder themselves is committing criminal fraud and they're a bad customer. You don't want to blacklist those customers. We all need to protect our revenue. But if you don't have that intelligence, it's really not just going to be, you know, an increasing liability, but it's actually going to affect your authorization rates as well.
So that's a great point, and maybe both of you can speak to this. How do you rehabilitate a customer? So what's a best practice? I mean, we need air travel needs every customer they can get right now. So if you can rehabilitate friendly fraud customers, I mean, this is ideal. So how do you do this? Like, what is the communication strategy? You know, you're a huge company. How do you have a? I mean, I guess you got to automate it, but how do you do this? What's a best practice?
Well, I'll speak on the chargeback side, and then yeah, I'll turn it over to Sandra. I'm sure, you know, I would think on the fraud side, then there's lots of technology that can establish additional security requirements dependent on if this has been a known friendly fraud abuser in the system, so that you can help reduce that risk. But on the chargeback side, once you have friendly fraud committed, most people don't realize that if you just let that go, then you're actually admitting fault. And as far as the issuer knows, they have no feedback. Unless you represent that and give data, then you are not telling the issuer what they need to know in order for them to improve their decisioning. And if you think about it, you know, you can, issuers and all of us, none of us are interested in chargebacks. I mean, this is actually a pain point that every single stakeholder suffers. So by giving feedback to the issuer and not doing so rehabilitating a consumer doesn't mean that you send like a horrible letter saying how the consumer is a liar, they're stealing from you, you're going to send them to prison. But instead, and this is where I think having a third party can be a great voice. So imagine you're going into a court case, because this is what happens with every chargeback. So you don't want to go with yourself, you know, calling blame and, you know, insulting this consumer, but you have your attorney that is going to say, well, these are the rules, this is how things work, and actually we're just informing you that if you do this again, you're going to lose. Well, now you've changed behavior, but you've done it in a soft way, so you haven't offended the consumer. And this is really just about following the rules. It's just rules. And now you've changed that behavior, you know, hopefully forever. The last thing, just quickly, is on a friendly fraud case, that one of the reasons why chargebacks are growing is because friendly fraud is not defended. So merchants don't have the resources or time to invest in making sure that they give these issuers feedback. Well, statistically, 50% of consumers that get away with friendly fraud will do it again in as little as 60 days. And you're really creating a very bad habit. So take it upon yourselves to break that habit. It's not just going to affect your business. It's probably going to be, you know, a trickle-down effect for many others as well.
So did you have anything to add, Sandra?
Sure. I think that this issue is becoming generational. So when you're allowing that generation to get away with friendly fraud, then as they get older, they become more creative on different types of how to beat the system. So it's important to be able to point that out, you know, to these parents of these Xbox kids who said, oh, my child would never do that, you know. Yes, they actually did. Here's the recording. And then help the parents actually combat that. It's education, right? To be able to educate our generation for our children so they don't just continue that cycle and become worse at it later in life.
You ladies are making me laugh. I have a 3-year-old. He gets 1 hour a day of iPad. He has bought stuff. I have never done a chargeback, but man, am I tempted, right? This little guy, I don't know how he figures out to buy stuff, right? So if I did do a chargeback, to your point, I'm a good customer, right? So I should be told in a good way and not chased away, right? So very excellent point. And honestly, he's bought movies on the TV without the TV being on. He has bought, like, he's 3 years old, right? So this is a problem already in my house. I can't figure. I put on parental guards. I mean, I don't know. He's 3.5. So to your point, great point. So we're coming towards the end. So any, like, one point from each of you, like what's one takeaway on chargebacks? Like, what should the audience remember? They've just been through, as travel, a chargeback tsunami. What's one thing you want them to remember, Monica?
So I would say, you know, we're at a pivotal point now where, just like in COVID, you know, you're going to, now probably going to experience just a hockey stick growth in all sorts of revenue opportunities. That's exciting. And as an airline, as any merchant in any industry, your focus should be on your core competency. That should be, you know, improving the experience with your customers, paying attention to your product, customer service, all of those things. When it comes to, you know, fraud and chargebacks, chances are this is not your core competency. And so I would really challenge, you know, these companies to look at how they can make smarter decisions, recognize the technologies that are available to assist them so that they can focus on their core competencies, and then everybody wins.
So, and I'll come to Sandra next, but something that I would like to plug for ourselves, we have a webinar on June 30th on NDC retrofitting payments. So NDC is a new standard that the IATA has come out, is implementing, and also One Order is an extension of it, where the airline becomes an online retailer and they're selling golf clubs and hotel, and it's all one transaction. And what about a partial chargeback on this, right? Like, I don't think it's worked out. So there are lots of new revenue opportunities, but I think there are chargeback pitfalls coming as well. So to your point, and we will try to explore some of those in that webinar. So maybe we can ask you back to help us, Monica, because we don't have chargebacks covered.
Sure.
So, and Sandra, what's one thing you would like the audience to remember from about chargebacks? So travel audience, you work at Microsoft, what's your guidance on chargebacks?
Well, Monica used the word pivotal, and it's important for the airlines to be able to pivot. Okay, it's easy to stay with what you know, right? It's easy to stay with your legacy solution because it's good enough. Well, don't just settle for good enough, settle for the best. So explore what's out there, take a look at machine learning, take a look at adaptive AI and how that revolves around your chargebacks, how it makes your system smarter, because ultimately it's going to benefit the airline the most.
So I think a point that Monica made earlier is that pre-booking, pre-order. That's the key, right? A lot of the legacy systems are post-order. And if we don't stop this before the order, we can be in a lot of trouble. So with that, thank you. Surprise guest, Sandra, so I'm happy to see you. This was literally during the webinar, so thank you, Monica, for arranging that.